Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Corey Albrecht. I am with Mohawk Valley Community College in the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing, also known as AIM. I'd like to welcome everybody in attendance this morning to the New York State Cybersecurity Assistance Program. Before we begin, I do have a couple housekeeping items. We started the program this morning promptly at 11 o'clock, and we will end right at 12 o'clock noon. Throughout the program, because we do have 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and some responses from our cybersecurity specialists, you can submit those questions at any point in time, including at the end of the presentation, in the control panel module, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. So please, throughout the presentation, submit the questions into the panel, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Also, I'd like to say that this webinar broadcast this morning is being recorded, and you can see this recording as well as the 4 previous recordings at www.newyork, and that's spelled New York, MEP.org. And again, that's New York, MEP.org. So please circle back when you get a free opportunity and take a chance to view all the previous recordings. Next slide. So as I stated, my name is Corey Albrecht. I do work for Mohawk Valley Community College. I'm the director for AIM, which is the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. We are the Mohawk Valley Regional MEP Center for the 6 counties here in the Mohawk Valley, and we provide manufacturing consulting services and technology development services to the more than 500 manufacturers which we have present in the Mohawk Valley. You can see my email information is below my name there. At any point in time, please feel free to reach out to me. Next slide. Okay, so here we are. So what is New York State Cybersecurity Assistance? So I'll give you a short answer. This is a grant program which was recently awarded in May of last year to Mohawk Valley Community College. The Advanced Institute for Manufacturing, AIM, we are the recipient of the grant and the managers and the facilitators of this program. This grant program consists of 3 main objectives or tasks. Task number 1 is to establish a marketing plan and an outreach plan with Empire State Development, which leverages the state's regional cybersecurity assets. Also, as part of this task number 1 is to develop a series of webinars and workshops to highlight the cybersecurity grant program and the DFARS requirements. Previously to this morning's broadcast, we had 3 workshop events. We had one live in Rome, New York at the NVCC Rome campus. Then we had 2 virtual events, one for Long Island Regional Defense Contractors and another one in Rochester. Today's broadcast, today's webinar, is part 5 of a 5-part webinar series, and it's titled General Advice and Pointers. Next slide, please. The second task is to train as many as 250 Department of Defense manufacturers how to perform a NIST 800-171 self-assessment. These companies should have the staff and the financial resources available internally at their organizations. Like I said, a minimum of 250 defense manufacturers will be awarded and engaged with this no-cost, on-demand, and virtual training tool. This tool was developed by Mohawk Valley Community College and Fuse Hub, and our very own Paul Laporte will lead your organization through a 16-part virtual training series, which he will lead you through step by step by step on how to conduct and implement an 800-171 self-assessment at your own organization. And the final task, task number 3, is to assist those defense contractors that may not have the resources and may not have the internal capabilities to perform an assessment on their own. At least 67 DoD companies will be awarded with an 800-171 assessment, which will be performed by one of our 3 implementation teams located across the state. An award can be made up to $6,000 of the cost, supporting the cost of a $7,500 assessment. Next slide, please. And then finally, all grant programs are not successful without the development of strategic business partners. As you can see, we have a number of them here on the screen this morning. The first one being Empire State Development. The grant originated at the state level through ESD, and like I had mentioned, it was awarded to Mohawk Valley Community College and our MEP Center, AIM. And then from there, we developed partnerships with three stakeholders from across the state. The first one being Fuse Hub, and then our two implementation team members, one of them being Twin State Technologies, and then MTech, who is our MEP center in the Hudson Valley. Next slide, please. And at this time, I would like to introduce Everton from Fuse Hub, and Everton is a New York State MEP Solutions Director. So with that, please take it away, Everton.
Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everyone. As Corey said, my name is Everton, and I'm Fuse Hub's New York MEP Solutions Director. So could we have the next slide, please? So you just heard from Corey that the New York State Cybersecurity Assistant Grant consists of 3 tasks, which are geared towards deliverables of a minimum of 250 companies that will be engaged in self-assessment training, and 6 to 7 companies will be receiving a grant to offset the cost of a personalized assessment. So how do we plan to accomplish this? To do so, we introduced the concept of a DoD cohort program. So our cohort should actually consist of the following. Excuse me. So our, I was afraid of that. I am. Sorry about that. So, I'm sorry. Our cohort should consist, of the following. So, the membership in the New York State DoD Cybersecurity Manufacturers Cohort. We will conduct a 5-part webinar series on cybersecurity, and we'll be presenting an interactive 9-session training session course that can be taken online at your pace, and this will prepare manufacturers to meet the NIST 800-171. I'm sorry, this is really that. Excuse me. So in addition to that, we'll be offering financial assistance for manufacturers with financial and staff constraints so that they can conduct an assessment. The objectives of this grant is that by April 2021, we'll want to enroll 320 DoD supply chain manufacturers and have them complete this training. In addition to that, we'll be conducting 6 to 7 physical assessments supported by the 6,000 grant each. Have the next slide, please. So the 9-session online self-paced on-demand interactive course I mentioned previously will provide in-depth understanding of the 14 cybersecurity families covered in the NIST SP 800-171 document. There will be quizzes. Yes, we're going to have a test. Each module we will be tested to ensure the material is well understood, because we're really serious about this thing. We really would like the folks who are doing the self-assessment training to understand it so they can move on and be able to help themselves as CMMC approach. So as I said before, the folks that complete this program, we will award them a certificate after the final module. Next slide, please. So earlier I mentioned, we talked about access to our archive of cybersecurity webinars and workshops. So we created a 5-part webinar series, which you can see here. And of course, we presented 4 already. This is the 5th one and the last one for the series. But all of these webinars will be available to cohort members to the New York MEP website. So there's really no issue. You can go back and look at the first one if you've missed it, and you can look at all 4. In addition, we did 3 workshops, and those workshops that were completed are already archived, so you'll be able to see this, and cohort members can, can access them. So If you're a manufacturer in the DoD supply chain, I urge you to take advantage of this program, and please join the cohort by going to newyorkmep.org/cohort-apply. This will get you there, and you'll be able to start your journey to being prepared for CMMC when it comes. So I thank you for that. And now I will pass you on to the inimitable Mr. Paul Laporte. He's a cybersecurity coordinator at AIM. And once again, I apologize for that coughing fit. Really sorry about that. So Paul, could you please take it away? Thanks.
Good morning, everyone, and let's go ahead and let Everton get a drink of water. Poor guy. Give him a little round of applause for suffering through that. Okay, so this is the fifth part in our 5-part webinar series. So some of you have seen me before, just to give you a little bit of a reminder or introduce you in case this is your first one of these that you've managed to be able to make. My name is Paul Laporte. I am the Cybersecurity Coordinator for the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. I'm one of the primary resources for conducting assessments, whether it's Department of Defense or non-Department of Defense related manufacturers throughout New York State. I work very closely with all of the MEP centers in New York State in regards to cybersecurity matters. I've been involved in IT and cybersecurity for a little over 10 years now, and I think by far my most rewarding job position so far has been in the manufacturing space, because there's a lot of manufacturers who are very scared, kind of put off by the subject, and it's very rewarding to show them that it's not only something that they can understand, but also that they can take some level of responsibility for. And that's why I thought that the good last subject to discuss for this webinar series was just general advice and pointers. So these are some things that you can implement either within your organization or even some of them personally in your normal home life that are going to be basically no cost. They're going to take maybe a little bit of investment of time, but they're things that you can either do or start thinking about doing today that can really greatly increase your overall cybersecurity and make yourself more protected. A lot of times, and we've discussed it in one of the previous webinars about like myths and misconceptions, it's the idea that you need to kind of do, that you can't do anything until you're able to do everything all at once. And that's really not true. You can really kind of take things little bit by bit and take care of the things you can do now and then get to the bigger projects later on down the line. And that's going to protect you overall than trying to wait for everything. So I've just got a small handful of tips here. And then once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation over to Terry Rivenberg, who is an IT contractor who works out of the Mohawk Valley, who's actually worked with some manufacturers very closely with myself in terms of the remediation side of things. So he'll have some interesting insights on what it's actually like to go through and make these changes based off of these assessments as somebody who works for one of these manufacturers. So moving on to the first topic that I wanted to discuss, and this is really one of the golden rules of cybersecurity, especially when you're talking about any sort of business or office environment. You're looking at the concept of what is known as least privilege, and simply defined, this is the idea that users only have access to the information that they need to perform their duties. So for example, accounting only has access to accounting files, human resource only has access to the human resources files, operations, have operations files. If you have people working on individual projects, then they'd have access to the folders that they need to complete that project, but not to everything in the actual organization. Now, what this does is this helps prevent a few different things from happening. Number one, it helps prevent somebody who works within your organization from accessing files that they shouldn't or don't need to, whether they do so intentionally or accidentally. This can lead to problems that arise and can cause security issues for you down the line. Secondly, what it does is it prevents the amount of damage that an outside agent can do if they were to compromise one of these accounts. So for example, if someone managed to get the login information for your lead engineer, and they got their username and their password. Now, obviously that's not great, but if their permissions are restricted, then that account will only have access to the files that the lead engineer can see, and they won't have access to, any financial information or personal data or anything like that. Whereas if that that lead engineer had global permissions, could see absolutely everything on your network. Well, now if his account gets compromised, that person can see everything too. So it's just a really good way to kind of cover your bases, not just to protect yourself from anybody inside your organization who might be doing something that they're not supposed to, whether that's intentionally or by accident, but also it prevents the amount of damage that can be done should one of those accounts get compromised. Now, if you want to take this a step further, you can actually take these different departments, these different areas, and put them on entirely separate networks. So not only can users not be able to access these different folders or sections of your network, but the computers themselves can't actually even reach them, even if those people had that access. Typically, you want to do this in any sort of environment where you have a machine that is interacting with the outside world. So if you have like a web server or an email server that's hosted in-house as opposed to through a third-party service, you would probably want to put that on a separate subnetwork from your internal network. So that way, again, if anybody from the outside world manages to attack it or compromise it, they can knock around in there, but they can't hop over to your internal network. This is also a good idea for if you're using like voice over IP, like a VoIP phone system, similar thing. You know, you put that on a separate subnetwork so people can knock around in that, but couldn't use it as a bridge to get to your important files. Finally, when discussing least privilege, we want to look at restricting the actual abilities of the users. And the most common example of that is restricting the installation of software to designated IT administrators or somebody who is approved to do so. A very popular thing to do, especially if you're working in an environment where there's like a lot of laptops or something like that, is to just give everybody the ability to install files on their own computer. The problem with that is that that means those people could then potentially be tricked into installing something that they shouldn't be able to, or again, if their account gets compromised, now that hacker, that attacker, has the ability to install software on the machine as well, and that can open up a lot of other gateways for much more powerful attacks. So we really want to restrict those privileges to people whose job it is to do that sort of thing, because number one, it minimizes the amount of targets that an attacker can really exploit, and number two, the targets that they can exploit are the ones who it's their job to think about this. They're usually the ones who are going to be the most secure and have the most awareness of this sort of subject. Resource placement is another discussion that we can have. And this is, again, this is kind of one that you can either use at work or at home, but it's the idea that we want to put important technological devices in physically secure areas. So again, as I've discussed before, when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're not just discussing what's happening in the digital world. We want to really look at all different areas of attack. And one of those areas is the physical world, is physical security. If I can steal a laptop, then that's going to be a very successful cyber attack. And it's not going to require a lot of technical knowledge or expertise if I can just set it up on my desk and play around with it for as long as I need to get in. So we really want to make sure that our vital resources we are protecting in the physical world as well. So for any servers that we have or key pieces of networking equipment, we want to make sure that those are stored either in locked rooms or in the event that they do need to be stored in an open space where multiple people can access it, we want to at least put them in a server closet or a server cage and then have that locked, and then have the IT administrators be the only one who have access either to that room or to that cage. So they have the key or they have the access code, or whatever it tends to be. This way, this ensures that the only people that can physically touch that piece of equipment are the people who actually need to do so. When setting up your wireless network, you want to consider the range of the Wi-Fi broadcast. And if possible, you want to try and position your Wi-Fi access points and routers in a centralized location within your facilities to minimize the amount of signal carry outside of the building. So this way you can prevent a scenario where an attacker can pull up in the parking lot across the street and see your wireless network and attempt to gain access to it without ever needing to be inside your building or have to deal with any of the other physical barriers you've put in the way for them. This will allow them to obviously spend much more time and have much more ability to try and compromise that network if they're able to do that. So if you can position your wireless router in a way, or certain higher level wireless routers, you can actually dial back the signal power of them to minimize it to as close to the walls of your building as you can. That will help keep your wireless network secure from any potential outside attackers. If you have company laptops that are not designated to a specific person, this is rare these days, but we still see it every once in a while, where somebody normally works in the office, but they have to go out on the road for, you know, a sales call or some sort of business related trip. They'll have a company issued laptop that they can be designated. If you have that sort of environment, you want to make sure that you are keeping track of these company laptops, or even this comes to things like thumb drives or portable hard drives or any sort of equipment that's really connecting to our network. You want to make sure you have a pretty clear idea of who has them at all times, whether they're in the inventory, whether they're out of the inventory, and if they're out, who has them and how long they're planning on having them for, so you can know that if something came back with, you know, some malware installed on it or something along those lines, you can actually go through the chain of possession of that particular device and say, okay, well, what did you do with it, and then kind of figure out where the weakness, where the attack may have come from. When we're talking about the in-office environment, when people are not sitting at their computers, we want to make sure that their computers are either locked or the user is logged out completely when they are not actually at that desk in front of the machine. The reason for this is that as an administrator, we want to have as clear of a picture of who is operating on our network and what they're doing at all times. If somebody gets up and leaves their desk, that opens the opportunity for somebody else to sit down at their desk and now operate effectively under the guise of that person. They can take actions that may be malicious or maybe just something they're not supposed to be doing, and they're doing that as somebody else. So then if you do happen to catch them, then you've caught the wrong person, and then that person gets, you know, disciplined or fired, and that person didn't do anything, and then the actual attacker or malicious agent is still operating in your organization. So you want to make sure that you have it communicated to your employees and or configured on your actual computers or servers to lock a person's computer if they have left it for so long, and you want to actually communicate to your employees that, hey, if you're getting away from your desk, going to a meeting, going out to lunch, just make sure you either lock your computer or you log out. And when you go home for the day, you really should be logging out. You don't want to just lock that up. You want them to actually be completely logged out, just for that extra layer of security, because they're going to be gone for an extended period of time. Okay, so one of the biggest discussions to have when it comes to cybersecurity, again, whether this is personal or business related, is strong passwords. Really, passwords are one of the only methods of preventing somebody from accessing your information. There is another method, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but passwords are the most common. They're the ones that we've been using for 20 years or so now. We're all pretty used to having to create passwords, but unfortunately, the way that we have to use them so much, it's kind of led to some bad habits that kind of need to be broken. So when we're talking about what makes up a strong password, we're really looking at the most important characteristic, which is the length of that password. The length is far and away the most important thing to think about when we are looking at a strong password. 1 second. Dry throat bug is contagious, I guess. So when we're talking about the length of a password, we want the absolute minimum length of the password to be 8 characters long, and really we want it to be recommended at 12 to 16 characters. 1 moment. Okay, we're back. So length's the most important thing, but we can increase the strength of the password by also adding in some special characters. So these are things like commas, numbers, a mixture of uppercase and lowercase letters, special characters like exclamation points, pound signs, dollar signs, things like that. Those are all things that can be used to make it password more difficult to guess and more difficult for a computer program to try and suss out by using what is known as a brute force attack, where it just kind of guesses a random sequence of characters and numbers until it gets the right one. The more unique properties you give a password, the more difficult that's going to be. Length is still the most important thing. So if it's a matter of having a longer password with fewer special characters or a shorter password with more special characters, you want to go with the longer password. And one of the things that's been recommended recently is instead of using a single password, actually combining 3 or 4 unusual words to make a longer passphrase. And the example I always have here is absolute handbag, comma, toasted Wisconsin, period. So these are 4 words that are nonsense when put together, but because they're nonsense, it's kind of easy to remember. Like, you kind of remember it because it's so strange, and it's easy for the person who created it to remember, but it's going to be next to impossible for anybody to guess. And you know, the example that I give here, this with the spaces and the comma and the period is 36 characters long. This is going to be an unbelievably difficult password for anybody to break, whether they're trying to guess it or they're using some sort of technological assistance. So if you want to do something like that, as opposed to just trying to think of a single word, that's actually kind of the better thing to do, and it's a little bit easier to remember overall. Now, if you're somebody who's an IT administrator, one of the things that's actually been recommended against in recent years that was kind of the norm for a while is password rotation. So, you know, it used to be that every 60 or 90 days you would have to create a new password. NIST has actually recommended that companies or administrators don't require this any longer, because all it does is it creates patterns for a person's password. So, and we've all done this. So if you have to change your password and your password is, you know, cybersecurity 123 exclamation point. And then 60 days, 90 days rolls around, you have to change your password. You change it to cybersecurity 123 @ symbol. Like, you don't change the whole password, you just change one character on the end. So if somebody manages to find your old password somewhere else and they try that and it doesn't work, well, they only really need to guess one character as opposed to the, you know, 8 or 12 or 16 or however many it might be. So they actually recommend, instead of changing the password every, you know, 60, 90 days or whatever, just find a singular password, make it as strong as you possibly can, you know, using multiple words, special characters, long as possible, and keep that until you either forget it or it is compromised in some way where you feel that you need to change it. Additionally, you want this password, whatever password you're creating, to be different than your other passwords elsewhere. One common form of attack is to find a list of passwords on a site that is less secure. So for example, if you were to use your work password as the same as your account for like your fantasy football league or something like that, attackers can attack your fantasy football league, see your email and your password, and then they can try and check a bunch of different other places that have that same email and then use that password, and then they can get in that way. So you really want to try and use a unique password for every site you're using. This can be difficult without the help of some sort of technological assistance. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but it's a very important thing, especially for any sort of work-related accounts or any sort of accounts that have access to sensitive information. You really want to make sure those are as unique as possible. And then again, from an administrative point or administrative side of things, you want to make sure that if your employees are trying to gain access to their account, if they're putting in an incorrect password, you really want to make sure that that account locks after, you know, about 3 to 5 failed login attempts. So if a person puts in their username and the wrong password 3 to 5 times, it'll just lock the account completely and go, okay, this is locked. You have to see your IT administrator, and they'll reset your account for you. It doesn't, you know, delete anything, doesn't put anything in danger, but what it does is it prevents somebody from just guessing the password over and over and over until they get it right. And then it'll also be kind of a red flag to somebody if they come in the morning and see that their account's locked, but they weren't the ones who screwed up the password. So it's a good signal for that there's been some sort of issue that has taken place that you can then further investigate with your IT department. So in terms of unique passwords, I just want to make sure that I'm not going over on my time here. So there are things that can assist you in creating unique passwords called password managers. These are programs that will generate random password for you and then keep track of all of those passwords in a vault that is protected by a master password. Best examples of these, I have a few listed here: LastPass, Keeper, Dashlane. There's a variety of ones out there. Web browsers will do this as well, but I generally recommend using an actual third-party program that is dedicated to this sort of thing. The security tends to be higher in these things, and that just ends up being, you know, overall better for the protection of your information. These vaults tend to be encrypted and not accessible by anyone besides the specific user. So for example, I actually at one time forgot my password for my LastPass account. And when I went to try and reset it, they said, well, we don't have access to your account. You have to just recreate this whole thing. So basically, really, for these top tier ones, nobody has access to this information other than you. Now, there is the question of, oh, well, if somebody guesses my master password, now they have access to everything, and that is a concern. But ultimately, that's still more secure than just using the same password for every website. Cybersecurity is always kind of a balance between security and convenience. You're still getting a lot better return on investment than if you were to use just a single password for everywhere else. These programs will also autofill these passwords in on websites without the need for you to remember them. It'll just fill them in automatically, and it much more greatly allows for individual password use for each site. Disaster recovery. So we really want to make sure that if we're in some sort of office environment, that our most important assets are being backed up on a regular basis. A good schedule to use is to have 3 separate backup files, one that runs once a month, one that runs once a week, and one that runs every day. So if any of those 3 backups get compromised or deleted or damaged in some way, then we still have another one to fall back on, and then you can always go back to up to a month. You can do a mixture of cloud storage or using some sort of physical external hard drive to do this. Again, if you can have one backup on cloud storage, one backup on an external hard drive, it varies your methods. So if one of them gets compromised or ruined in some way, then you don't lose everything. You also want to consider backing up your paper documents as well. So digitally scanning and storing any information that's coming in by paper that you don't already have digitally stored on your systems. This can be very daunting for people, for companies who have like 40, 50 years of paper to go back through. What I would recommend is to start with the papers coming in today, and then when you get around to it, you can work on backing up digitally your paper archives. Doing something is better than doing nothing. Again, we don't have to do everything right away. Just start with the stuff that you're getting now and go from there. And then finally, you want to look at developing a disaster recovery plan. This will make sure that you know what to do in case of a disaster, and will give you some foresight to be able to think about that in advance, get together people in different departments and say, okay, if this building explodes, what is the first thing that we need to do? Who is the first person we need to contact? How do we get our computers back online as quickly as possible? Who do we need to contact in terms of customers? You can work those things out before the disaster happens and have a lot more clarity and a lot more time to think about it, as opposed to trying to do it after the building's already blown up, and now you're going, oh my God, what do we do? Time is running out. Help! It'll allow you to have a little bit more clarity and sort things out and be able to execute them more cleanly in the event that the disaster happens. Finally, well, not finally, but we're looking next at clear policies. We want to make sure that we have the rules written down for our employees that we want them to follow, detailing things like, what is our password policy in terms of length? What is acceptable to send in an email in terms of attachments or in the body? What is acceptable usage of connection to our Wi-Fi network? Do we allow mobile phones on our shop floor because they have cameras? Do we want to avoid having people take pictures of our equipment or our settings, things like that? If we have company issued devices, what are the rules for handling those? What are the rules for reporting incidents if something comes up from an IT or security related perspective? Who do we tell those to? Who do we go to? And then what is the response on their end? And with all of these things, we want to make sure that, especially for ones where we're looking at disciplinary actions being involved, we want to make sure those consequences are clearly defined. But I do always want to reinforce the idea that we don't want to scare people into not reporting things to us. So we want to make sure those are clearly outlined, but we don't want to try and intimidate people. And then going hand in hand with policies is making sure that we have proper training. So proper training starts with a good formal employee orientation. We want to make sure that we review our IT and we want to make sure that any new and incoming employees review the IT and security policy with a mixture of our human resources and our IT team, so we can explain those policies to them and make sure that they know what they need to do and how they're supposed to handle certain sensitive information, anything related to the government, financial information, personal information, anything like that. We want to make sure that they know how to do those things and are confident to do that. And again, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing awareness over punishment. If you have any questions or you think you did something wrong, let us know. If we need to give you more training, that's fine, but we'd rather that than you pretend the thing didn't exist because you're worried about getting fired. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're retraining our existing employees about 1 to 2 times per year. So it's rare that a company's IT practices and policies will stay completely stagnant for a whole year. We usually change, some sort of program, or we put some sort of new practice into place, and we want to make sure that we're updating people on those changes as our policies evolve and as new systems get introduced. So these can be also a refresher for any existing policies that people may not use all the time. Maybe we don't use our incident response system on a day-to-day basis. We need to remind people how to do that in the event that they need to. And it'll also help us identify trouble spots. If certain departments are doing things that they shouldn't, we can kind of suss that out and give them additional training, and it'll help to get rid of any bad habits that might pop up among the workforce. And then finally, I did want to talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication, because in addition to having strong passwords, having a good multi-factor authentication solution is really the best thing you can do in terms of overall security from a user level. So multi-factor authentication is defined in 3 different classes. The first is something you know, which is pretty much always your username and your password. Something you have, which can either be some sort of physical token or some sort of rotating code that's sent to your phone that's a sequence of numbers that you're either texted or you find via an app. Or something you are. Something you are is usually biometrics. So fingerprint scan, thumb scan, retinal scan, facial scan, these are popular for cell phones, things like that. The idea is that in order for it to be true multi-factor authentication, you need to use 2 of these 3 classes to log in. So if you've done a lot of online banking or anything like this, this shouldn't be too foreign of a subject for you. You have to put in your username and your password, and then you get texted a code on your phone. You have to put that in as well. That's multi-factor authentication. Really, we want to make sure that we're enabling this option in whatever systems that we possibly can that have access to any sort of information we're looking to protect, because this is incredibly powerful in making sure people stay out of accounts that aren't meant to be there. Even if somebody has a person's username and password, it's still not going to be enough to get into the account if multi-factor authentication is enabled. So short of them, kidnapping the person that they're looking to assume the account of, they really aren't going to be able to get into that person's account. It's a very, very powerful way to stop them. And really quickly here, we just want to look at a couple different options for multi-factor authentication. So from the software side of things, there are a few different apps and programs that we can install on our computers and our phones that will act as our second factor authentication. Google Authenticator, Microsoft has their own option. Duo and Authy or a couple others. There's a bunch out there. These are just a couple of the most popular ones. And then again, these will either generate a random number on your phone or send some sort of notification to your phone, like a button that you have to press after you've logged in that will allow you access into the account. These are very popular ones and either free or pretty low cost. And then from a hardware perspective, these are things that will actually be separate devices beyond anything you would normally carry on you. You have things like YubiKey or Verimark, which will be an actual, basically like a thumb drive that you'll plug into your computer, and the program will check to make sure that's installed when you put in your username and your password before it will allow you to access the account. So unless you actually have that physical hard key, it will not give you access. And then you have stuff like RSA Secure IDs, which are kind of old school but still exist, where it's basically a little keychain that just generates a series of random numbers every 30 seconds or so. And then what you do is you put in your username and your password, and then the number that's on that token at any given time, and then that allows you access in. But again, multi-factor authentication for any system you have, especially things like remote desktop, email, anything that you really can use from, especially when you're looking at accessing your files from the outside world, like the internet or outside the office, it's a really good idea to have multi-factor authentication enabled, and it's going to be something that is going to just up your security exponentially. And a lot of systems that you're probably using today have it built in natively. It's not even something you may necessarily need to buy as a third-party piece of software. It is something that you might just be able to go into the settings of and turn on in your firewall or in your your email exchange server settings. So something worth looking into. These are just, again, a few things. There's obviously a lot of other subjects, but these are a couple things to get you started. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presenter baton over to Terry Rivenberg. And he is going to go ahead and talk to you about what this looks like from an IT contractor perspective. Terry, take it away.
Hello, my name is Terry Rivenberg. I'm the owner of Midnight Magics. I have a small computer business firm that provides IT services to small businesses, and also which includes some manufacturing in the area. At the beginning, we started working with Paul and Corey in regards to a customer of mine, the CTM Corporation. CTM, unfortunately, was taken down for a little while with a crypto virus. Wasn't that we didn't have the security in place or that we didn't keep track of the systems. It was that basically the virus had gotten in through a back door. They kept themselves there until the weekend and then deployed over the weekend when no one was in the building. So we ended up contacting Corey and Paul in regards to getting help to try to secure the network down better than what we had already did. One of the big things we found out is that it's best to have a second set of eyes so that you have somebody else who's looking at your network and your security to make sure that you're not overlooking something or also forgetting something. We ended up working with them to find out that little bitty small issues can create big problems. And that also myself dealing with customers and the small businesses that have been around for a while, that the ways of the past must stop. Owners and managers enjoy keeping user login information in places and files or even written down in desk drawers, which that becomes a compromise to the security of the network. Also, administrative login should be separate from the actual logins that people have, so that say you're the owner of a company, that your account should not have a login that was based on an administrative rights. You should have a separate login for an admin user. Also, as Paul had said, access to files and systems should be limited to those who actually need it and not across the board. As Paul had said about password managers, with password managers, you can store your passwords and so that you're not using the same one per the site. They'll also generate, as he said, the secure passwords for you and auto-filling on websites. You can also, with some of the password managers, also make it so that they will fill in your passwords into software applications as well, depending on, usually that's a paid subscription that you have to go through. Also with some of the password managers, they get the ability to share passwords securely with users and employees that need to access websites, but you really only give them the password. They can have access to use it, but not actually see it. Or in some cases too, if they have access to see the password, if the password should be required to change and they change the password, it'll go across the board to everybody who's logged in and has access to that account. In regards to CTM, one of the issues that we had was that the back door was actually through our remote access software. They gained access through a back door, ended up getting into our remote server and making accounts that the attacker could go in and have full access to shut off all the antivirus and everything in the system. We found that outside remote access not only should be secure, but also using a VPN or a virtual private network, or you could use also secure software like TeamViewer and such to keep updates rolling, that you can prevent these from attacking, because only certain people have access to actually get into the network that you know about, and it's not based on the login or password or anything of that such. Also too, any person who connects in remotely, especially nowadays with the pandemic going on, you have a lot of remote users, that the computer that they connect in with should also be vetted. It should have antivirus installed and be active. Also, the operating system and software updates should also be applied, because you don't want a computer accessing remotely that may be compromised itself. On our remote server, we ended up installing Duo Security, which ended up giving us two-factor authentication that users who remote in would actually have access to get into the system, but they'd have to pass not only their password, but also to do a two-factor authentication to get in, which makes it more secure against attack that if people don't have that two-factor, they won't be able to get through. Also, anybody who remotes in, their connection should time out so that if they walk away from the computer, that they're not going to stay active, and also that the VPN disconnects so that that link doesn't remain available to any program or anything else that might be on the computer. Also, we found out that dated systems, so a lot of manufacturers have CNC machines that have controllers. These controllers are expensive to replace, and quite a few of them have outdated systems from anywhere from Windows 3.1 I've seen on machines to Windows XP. Those become a security risk if you've got them attached onto your network to transfer files back and forth to. These should be disconnected, and you can transfer your information usually via USB, floppy disk. It might be a pain, but it helps the network to remain secure. Also, nowadays you can actually, as Paul was saying about a subnet, with subnets you can make them via VLANs, which are virtual networks that basically split your network up. This does require business class hardware. I know some small businesses use the stuff that we use at home, which doesn't allow that. But the business class hardware will allow you to split your network up so that it's compartmentalized so that you can have your different systems in different areas. So like if you have, as he was saying about going to the internet, if you have devices like VoIP phones and such that need to be access to the internet, they can have access without actually attaching onto your normal network. Also, you can split up groups and such with this as well. And also you can split up your Wi-Fi. One of the things for VLANs would also be nowadays, a lot of people have IoT, which is Internet of Things devices, which are smart switches, thermostats, security systems, security cameras that are on the network. Those are all devices that should be put onto their own network away from your main one so that if they should have a vulnerability, that they are not attaching onto your network and have access to your stuff. Also, mobile devices, phones, tablets, they should also be attached onto a VLAN as well so that they are away from the main network. That way too, if the software is older on a device or it may have been compromised, that it's not going to hurt your network. Also, besides securing the network with passwords and such, as Paul said about keeping your equipment locked up, yeah, you should keep your servers, your network switches in rooms that can be locked, and also monitor access to those rooms. We ended up using, for CTM, smart door locks, which only the people who need access to can get to. We've got keypads. We can limit users. It also records who goes in at what time. And we can make sure that if they leave the area, that the door locks behind them so that somebody can't walk in behind them because they forgot to lock the door. And if you can't do that and you just have a normal lock, then also too, it's best to have a sign-in sheet where at least you can tell who's been there and make them accountable for if anything goes wrong. So that's going to be the end of my presentation. If anybody has questions, and I will pass this back on to Paul.
Hello, Terry. Thank you very much. Sorry about that delay there.
Oh, that's okay.
All right. Thank you so much. At this point, we are complete with the webinar, and we're going to go to audience questions here. And we have a few questions that came in. And first one that I'd like to really bring up, and this is going to be for for you, Paul Laporte. The question came in: if you're not a member of the cohort, you want to join it today to get an access, but how do you actually join the training? And this is an important part of it. The audience person was actually trying to figure out how they could access the teachable program that we discussed earlier. So Paul, if you could answer that, I'd really appreciate it.
So this is if you're not a member of the cohort?
So it is, if you're not a member of the cohort, you'll have to become a member. But if you're a member of the cohort, how do you go about accessing the training?
So once you sign up for the cohort, usually within about a week or so of signing up, you will receive an email from Teachable that will guide you to set up your account. Now, if it's a situation where you signed up to the cohort and you kind of didn't get the chance to get to it for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then you try and go back and access that link, it may not work. In the event that happens, just email me or reach out to whoever. Myself would be the easiest one, and then let us know. And then the worst comes to worst is we might need to just recreate your account, but then that will get you access to it. So usually, like I said, if you're just signing up, like if you go today, within a few days up to a week, you'll get an email from Teachable saying, hey, your account's been created, create your password, and then you can log in, and from there you'll access the course. But if it's somebody who registered and signed up for the cohort, a few months ago, and you're just looking to get to that information now, you can go back through your inbox and check and see if the email's there. It might work. If it doesn't, just let me know and we can get you in.
And to address the other part of that question here, Paul, for folks who want to join the cohort who haven't done so already, please go to https://newyorkmep.org/cohort-apply, and you should be able to get into that website.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's see here if we have another question. And this question, I believe, is going to go to Terry. So it says, how do you get access to information and the network from your phone or other device that you use to do work? And this has to do with VLANs. So can you answer that?
Yeah, so with VLANs, if you have a VLAN set up and you need to get, I guess it's like if you need to get access to files and such, then if you're on a VLAN, you should be connected back in with the VPN connection, because you want to make sure that you're on a secure connection. You want to make sure that you're not always attached onto the network, that the phone, that the phone is separated. So if you, and most phones now have settings where you can either download software for a VPN, or the VPN can be set up in the router. So if you connect through that way, when you're going onto the network, when you're going off from the network, and that way stuff will stay secure.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. So we have another question here, and this one is going to go to you, Paul. So the person is asking, said, so I'm working from home, so there's no risk of a stranger physically accessing my work laptop. Am I safe to leave the computer in the sleep mode?
So it's sleep mode. Sleep mode actually does log you off or lock your computer. At least typically, I think you may be able to configure the settings otherwise. So it's not as big of a deal. No, I mean, if you're obviously in an environment where you don't need to physically worry about anyone sitting down at your space, it's not as much of a concern. However, if you have a scenario where you're just leaving your computer logged in and just kind of running all the time, that could still lead to potentially a security issue, because then that means that if somebody has done something to gain remote access to your computer, then if it's on and running, then I can find a time of the day that I know you're probably not going to be working on it, like 3 in the morning, something along those lines, when you're probably going to be in bed, and then I can access your computer and then do things and start to kind of root through it, and you won't know that I'm there. So it's still not a bad idea to at least put your computer into sleep or turn it off or log off when you're not sitting down and using it. Additionally, obviously when you're working with a laptop, especially this is more like if you're working on like a home PC that you kind of bought yourself and you use for personal purposes as opposed to professional ones, and multiple people use it, then obviously there's some concerns there, because if somebody downloads something that they weren't supposed to, like your kids or something like that, that installs some malicious software on your computer, and then you log on to that same computer to do your work, that could lead to a problem too, because your kids might have installed something that is tracking your keystrokes or monitoring your web activity or your emails or something like that. So there's still some additional security concerns. Again, you don't really have to worry as much as somebody sitting down and doing something as you that they're not supposed to, but you still want to try and make sure that your computer isn't accessible when you're not at it.
Thanks, Paul. So we have another question here, and I kind of wondered when someone would ask this, and so it's going to be open to Paul, you and Terry, whichever one want to pick this up, or both of you for that matter. And the audience person is asking, in the cybersecurity future, is there any incorporation of blockchain technology that can be applied? Okay, so could you, either one of you can tackle it.
Terry, you want to take a swing at this one first?
I'll let you go.
Neither of us are terribly excited about answering this one, because honestly, anything in regards to working in the future is always kind of a question mark. As far as the blockchain technology goes, the answer is probably yes, and it probably comes more in the way that either information is going to be stored or accessed, or a little bit of both. So it is something where that could be potentially used as an extra method of security. It could even potentially be worked into some sort of encryption protocol, which is actually like digitally locking this information in some way. And I think that there are probably already companies out there who are either starting to implement that, or at least toying around with the early stages of it. But again, it's a question of, what gets off the ground and how reliable is it, and how easy it is for the person to use. So those are always the factors when it comes to whether or not a new security measure gets off the ground, is how easy it is for the general consumer to use it. So is it possible? Yes. Even if it does happen, though, it most likely will happen in the guise of it's going to be operating under the hood. You're really not even going to know how it's working. That'll probably be the best way for it to be implemented. But I guarantee you that at least somebody is trying to work it in. As whether or not it'll get off the ground on a large scale, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, so thank you very much for that one, Paul. Terry, do you have a comment, or should I just move on? We've got questions.
You can go on. I mean, basically, with anything in the future, it's definitely on how they're going to implement it, and anything that becomes, most of the stuff with the IT guys, it starts out really complex, and then they kind of have to make it simpler for the general public to use.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, this one is one that I wanted to come up, and I'm glad an audience member brought this up. And it has to do with the acronym SPRS, the Supplier Performance Risk System. So, Paul, I'm going to direct this one to you. The audience person would like to know how it is considered in awarding contracts for the DoD.
Okay, so just to fill people in who don't know what the SPRS is what the Department of Defense is currently using as a way to keep track of companies' self-assessments. So with a few exceptions, there are a couple small handful of contracts out there where the DoD is actually either reviewing a company's security or doing a full assessment themselves. But for the vast majority of companies, this is a tool for you to self-report your self-assessment, or if you've had an organization like myself at AIM come in and do it, you can take the information that we've given you to kind of fill in your SPRS information and give yourself a score. Now, the big question and the biggest concern for companies is like, oh, I have a low score, or in some cases, because of the weird scoring system the SPRS uses, you could actually come out with a negative score potentially. And how will that, qualify me or disqualify me for different awards? So the official line for this from the Department of Defense and from NIST and everybody who's kind of used the SPRS and pushed it forward is that there is no formal score for qualification or disqualification. So there's nothing that says, oh, if your score is 40 or below, you cannot bid on a contract. There is no qualifying or disqualifying score flat out. However, that being said, if you and another organization are both bidding on a contract and their SPRS score is very high and your SPRS score is very low, or vice versa, the company that has the higher score, that could be a factor in the decision that the prime contractor makes when awarding that contract. Just like price, convenience, like there's a lot of things that will come into that. That is something that may factor into it. That is going to depend from contractor to contractor. If it's a pretty close difference in score, like somebody is like an 80 and you're a 70, like it's probably not going to matter that much, because there are certain items that if you're non-compliant and can ding more off your score, that would be worse for your security than if you had like a larger number that were less important. So it may not be that big of a deal. If it's a case where somebody's like at 100 and you're at like a -20, it's probably not going to be great for you. So that's why it is important to try and work on these things as much as you can. But officially, there is no qualifying or disqualifying score. As long as you have a score in there, that is what they care about. So if you have a score in, you can bid on a contract. It is just going to kind of depend on who your competition is, like so many other things when bidding on a contract.
Thank you very much, Paul. So we're running out of time here. I think there's one last question that came up, which someone wanted to know, how is the manufacturer defined in order to be eligible to join? So I can go ahead and tackle this one. Basically, if you manufacture something, if you make something for someone who makes something for a prime contractor for DoD, then you can be considered in this particular case. So, if you're in the supply chain, and even if you're far down the chain, you can still apply for the cohort. I mean, bottom line is that if you have a contract with someone who has a contract with the DoD, or you get money for, if you're paid to make something for someone who makes something for the DoD, then you're part of that supply chain. And as a manufacturer, you'll be eligible to join. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today. Please note that if you have questions, you could certainly get to us at FuseHub. My email address is everton@fusehub.com. It's very, very, easy to get to us. Also, if you need to join the cohort, which I recommend that you do, I believe we just put that information in chat for you, but you can go to newyorkmep.org/cohort-apply, and you should be able to access that and become a member. Okay, Paul's address is also P Laporte. That's P as in Peter, L-A, P as in Peter, O-R-T-E @mvcc.edu. And he will be able to answer your question. And besides, once you're a member of the cohort, Paul, as he mentioned before, will be having time, one-on-one time with you to help you as you journey through the Teachable program. So please feel free to sign up and talk to Paul about this. So thank you very much. This is the end. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Terry, and all the folks who are supporting this program. And we look forward to seeing you next time.